The title of Kenpachi and the ritual of passing it down the generations of 11th Division captains is one of the Soul Society's oldest and most enduring traditions. Bestowing someone with the title of Kenpachi denotes them as the strongest Shinigami of their era, until of course a worthy successor comes along, kills them, and takes the title for themselves. It's truly one of the Soul Society's most barbaric and brutal traditions, steeped in a history of blood. But it also is one of the oldest as well, originating around the same time as the inception of the Gotei 13 itself. And so it makes a lot of sense that this particular tradition would originate from one of the darkest periods of Soul Society's history, when the Gotei 13 was in its infancy and was also its most thuggish and warmongering. And yet, despite the incredible lore behind this idea of the title of Kenpachi and the wonderful historical lineage it must have throughout the generations, we really know virtually nothing about the collective history of this title. In fact, of the 11 members to have held the name Kenpachi, we don't even know half of them. Despite that, in this video I am going to collect everything we do know about the passing of the name Kenpachi, of that prestigious title that denotes the strongest Shinigami, and try and bring it all together in this video to look at the current complete history of the name Kenpachi. Before we begin, however, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now, as you're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week. Also, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, because it really does help give the video more exposure on YouTube and get it out there to more Bleach fans like yourselves. And if you want to help support me a little further with what I do here on the channel, I do have a Patreon as well. You can get videos like this one early, and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. And so to everyone doing that at the moment, I just want to say a massive thank you, and I couldn't do this without your continued support. So, as I mentioned, despite the idea of the title of Kenpachi being genuinely one of Bleach's most compelling concepts, and one that truly stretches back to some of the earliest days of the story, the history itself is unfortunately spotty. There are a lot of pretty hefty gaps, as you will soon see. But despite that, the information we do have currently collected from both the manga and some of the light novels is very compelling, and paints a nice picture of the spectre of Kenpachi and how it has lingered in the Gotei 13 for so very long. Now, as we know, of course, the title of Kenpachi is given to the strongest Shinigami of any particular era, and there can be only one Kenpachi per generation, and this is normally decided by, like I said, the killing of the current holder of the name, which is then passed on to a successor. Now, the story of the title of Kenpachi takes us right back to some of the earliest days of the Soul Society itself that we actually get to see in the manga, which is over 1,000 years ago. And it's at this point that the world is a dark and desolate place, with bloodthirsty criminals roaming the land. And the absolute worst of these is a woman called Unohana. She is a ruthless killer who takes on the name Yachiru, meaning 8,000 styles, to showcase just how much of a master of the blade she truly is. Her skills, it seems, would be sought out, however, as Yamamoto would come to her wanting to found the Gotei 13, which, as we know at this point, is nothing more than a gang of ruthless thugs. Unohana would accept and become one of the founding members of the Gotei 13, presumably helping to found the 11th Division, becoming its first ever captain, and also creating the tradition of Kenpachi. We don't necessarily know why Unohana created the name Kenpachi other than to designate herself as the absolute strongest Shinigami at the time. It's not hard to imagine a world where she would have really had to have advertised that so as to avoid being attacked by pretty much anybody, although the Unohana we know from this time period would have welcomed those battles, as she absolutely adores and loves fighting, even learning seriously impressive healing techniques from Kirinji Tenjiro at some point around this time in order to continue to prolong her fights. And despite becoming a captain of the brand new Gotei 13, Unohana remained as bloodthirsty as ever. In fact, we actually get to see a moment of this in a flashback during the Thousand Year Blood War arc, where she goes out on a mission with her new squad members, supposedly to kill some rebel warriors just outside the Seirete. However, one of her squad members very quickly deduces that they're actually out here in order to find someone who is worthy enough to give Unohana a battle that will satiate both her and her blade. Although at first glance it seems they're not going to find someone to match up to this caliber, Unohana stumbles upon an enormous mound of corpses and a feral boy atop them, clutching an enormous Zanpakuto toe. The two of them clash in an epic and grueling battle, and of course we know that this feral boy would eventually grow up to become Zaraki himself. They have an amazing sword fight, the two of them feeling absolute elation, and Unohana realises that she has finally found that worthy opponent. Although she manages to defeat Zaraki, we see him lying face down in a pool of his own blood. She is dealt serious wounds throughout the course of their battle, and she comes to the realisation, the epiphany, that actually Zaraki was the stronger combatant of the two of them, and that he is definitely going to be worthy of one day holding the title of Kenpachi for himself and taking the name from her. The timeline around this section of the story is unclear. However, considering Unohana is still in her Yachiru persona, I think it's fairly safe to assume that this is one of the oldest moments we have ever seen in the Bleach manga. And it's also quite unclear as to what happens pretty much exactly after this moment. We can assume that Unohana was satisfied having found someone who not only put up a great fight and a worthwhile challenge, but also surpassed her in many ways. We also know that it's around this time that the first Quincy War takes place, as Yhwach himself invades the Soul Society, but is repelled by Yamamoto and this first Gotei 13, a Gotei 13 that would strike some level of fear into Yhwach, that he would eventually turn back on Yamamoto much later on in the future. Having defeated his nemesis, Yamamoto would now soften over time, and the whole Gotei 13 would soften and mellow out with him, growing more peaceful and perhaps more complacent as well. I think it's fairly safe to say that this is when Unohana discards her Yachiru persona forever, and also relinquishes the title of Kenpachi, instead opting to become the captain of the 4th Division and taking the name Retsu. She undergoes a complete transformation, braiding her hair so as to hide the wound that she received during her battle with Zaraki, and instead takes on a tender, caring and motherly-like nature, forever suppressing the bloodlust within. Now, we know the tradition of Kenpachi and the passing on of that title continued, but we don't really know how. Considering Unohana was never killed, we can assume she relinquishes the title of Kenpachi, which of course she came up with voluntarily, perhaps to a second Kenpachi, or perhaps just leaving it open for someone to eventually step into that role in the future. But unfortunately, we really don't know an awful lot about this period. We don't know who the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th Kenpachi actually were. However, it's at this point we actually start to encroach upon the present-day timeline itself. We are roughly 250 years out now from the present storyline, and we actually have to introduce one of the light novels, Spirits Are Forever With You. In the light novel, we discover that the 7th Kenpachi is in fact Kenpachi Kuruyashiki, a good-natured but immensely powerful man who is very close friends with other senior captains Kyoraku and Ukitake. Kuruyashiki was actually invited to join the 0 Division but turned it down, feeling that that kind of stuffy existence wasn't for him. Kuruyashiki was unbelievably powerful, with a Bankai so strong the Central 46 actually said that he could never activate it within the Seirete itself. And it's seemingly this ruling that would lead to this Kenpachi's downfall, as he is killed by his successor Soya Asashiro, who would go on to become the 8th Kenpachi. Asashiro would later himself remark that if Kuruyashiki had actually used his Bankai, his illegal Bankai, he probably would have won their duel. But Asashiro is now the new Kenpachi, having killed Kuruyashiki and taken the title from him. He's a bit of a strange character in the light novel, and he eventually revolts against the Soul Society itself, putting up an unbelievable fight once again with an incredibly powerful Bankai that's in a constant state that essentially allows him to fuse and meld with his environment. But he eventually surrenders upon hearing that the Royal Guard, the Zero Division, are being called in to apprehend him and stop his coup. He's arrested and sent to Muken, where he would reside for a very long time. Now moving on, seeing as Asashiro himself, much like Unohana, was never actually killed, we don't really know who the 9th Kenpachi is. We never find out. However, moving even closer to the present day, roughly about 110 years before the present day, we find out that the 10th Kenpachi is a boorish, oafish man by the name of Gosuke Kiganjo. And this is something we learn during the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, now back in the canon manga itself. Kiganjo is remarked as being an incredibly lazy man who doesn't take his captain's duties seriously. He doesn't turn up to any of the meetings, as we see for ourselves in that flashback arc, leading to characters like Shinji being very annoyed at him and even wishing that he wasn't a captain among the rest of them. And luckily for Shinji, he wouldn't be for all that long. Now again, we don't know the time frame that well, but actually we do see once again in the canon manga itself a flashback of Kenpachi Kiganjo meeting Zaraki himself, the young feral boy from the Rukongai who once clashed blades with Unohana, is now all grown up and even has a little Yachiru with him too. They have emerged from the lawless world of the Rukongai, and Zaraki challenges Kiganjo to a duel. Kiganjo accepts the challenge, but Zaraki kills him in a single strike in front of over 200 members of the 11th Division. By doing so, Zaraki becomes the new captain of the division and also the 11th holder of the title of Kenpachi, walking away holding his predecessor's blood-stained Haori. And so we finally reach the present day story. Kenpachi Zaraki is the captain of the 11th Division and the holder of that Kenpachi name. However, his claim to the Kenpachi title seems tenuous at best, as Unohana is still very much alive and has been ever since the earliest fight they had over 1,000 years ago. She has remained the 4th Division captain, but has always been watching Zaraki's growth throughout the years. Going briefly back to the light novel Spirits Are Forever With You, during the time skip after Aizen's defeat, Soya Asashiro, the 8th Kenpachi, would re-emerge from prison and challenge Kenpachi Zaraki to a duel, but eventually be defeated. Although he is not killed, he returns voluntarily to Muken to kind of assess his life, and I think it's pretty safe to say relinquishes his claim to the title of Kenpachi forevermore. And yet, the title of Kenpachi, the strongest Shinigami, still feels like it belongs to someone else, and so we come to the 1,000-year Blood War arc. After the first invasion by the Quincy Vandenreich, where Kenpachi Zaraki is very nearly killed by Yhwach, the Central 46 give Shunsui Kyoraku the go-ahead to order that Zaraki be taught the art of fighting and the way of the sword, which is a pretty fancy way of basically saying unlocking his true power and learning the name of his Zanpakuto toe. In order to do this, Kyoraku reaches into the dark depths of Soul Society history and enlists Yachiru Unohana, not Retsu Unohana, but he invokes her original persona to help teach Zaraki the true meaning of fighting, essentially. She is revealed to us as readers to be the first Kenpachi for the first ever time, having never died and then therefore never truly by the law of Kenpachi relinquishing the name to anyone else, waiting instead it would seem for a truly worthy successor, the feral boy she once fought over 1,000 years ago. And it seems that time has come. Now reverted back to her old self, she challenges Zaraki to a fight, not just to live, but also for the title of Kenpachi. And they have a pretty amazing battle that I can't wait to see animated, where they clash. Unohana kills him over and over and over, but in order to wash away her original sin of helping him repress his power during their original fight, she unlocks Zaraki's true nature, his true strength, and he kills her. She dies at peace at last after over 1,000 years of essentially carrying the weight and the burden of the name of Kenpachi, waiting for the day for a truly worthwhile successor to emerge. We see some wonderful imagery of the blood finally washing from her hands, finally lifting from a blade that has killed and killed for centuries, as she can finally give all of that and the name to Zaraki himself. And finally, in the second Quincy invasion, Yachiru and Isane are at the mercy of the Sternritter Gremi Thamo when Zaraki himself arrives on the battlefield with a changed demeanour. He seems very stoic, very statuesque, shadows on his face, and Isane, wondering about her lost captain, asks Zaraki what became of Unohana, to which he replies he has killed her. Despite being incredibly shocked and saddened by this, Isane also feels a moment of relief, as she notes that Unohana was finally able to give away her name. Kenpachi agrees without showing the emotion on his face that yes, she has finally relinquished that name, that title of Kenpachi that has dogged her for so many years, at which point he turns to Gremi and finally introduces himself as the Kenpachi, spoken truly and as though he finally understands the weight of which he now bears, truly becoming the Kenpachi now that Unohana is dead, and inheriting that name once and for all. And so that's it for a complete known history of the title of Kenpachi and its many descendants through who the title has been passed. Let me know what you thought of the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully maybe if you needed it, it brought some clarity to the whole timeline of Kenpachi, even though, like I said, there's so much missing criminally. It's a huge shame. But what we do have here is awesome and paints a really cool picture of the brutality that used to haunt the Soul Society and has kind of remained thanks to the line of Kenpachis. Alright, that's it though, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. Let me know in the comments below which of the Kenpachi characters is your favourite throughout Bleach. Are you a Zaraki fan like so many others, or perhaps you prefer the mysterious and bloodthirsty Unohana, or maybe it's one of the very few we know in between. Until next time though, guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.